Please welcome Marjorie Sims, Managing Director of Ascend at the Aspen Institute.
Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Awesome, awesome. You look fabulous. For those of you who are joining for the first time, welcome friends and guests from across the Roaring Fork Valley, and those of you that are live streaming this afternoon. This afternoon is about ideas and inspiration brought to you by Ascend at the Aspen Institute. So for those of you that joined us yesterday, welcome back. You look fabulous. So together with the magnificent Ascend Fellows on this stage, we will delve into and co-create solutions to new and challenging problems that have been long-standing, so that all children in our communities and their parents can dream big and live well. So Aspen VisionXChange is a gathering of dreamers and doers with one shared North Star, and that is transforming the hearts, minds, policies, and practices so that all families can thrive. Emphasis on all families thriving. Round of applause for that. So, thank you. So each afternoon is designed in 3 themes: dream, disrupt, and delight. How do we dream big about those challenges that are facing families and making certain that they can prosper? How do we disrupt the ways in which we have been doing things and really stand up to those naysayers and share with them how you can center well-being across our systems? And then also, how do we delight in joy and find it when we are faced with hard and challenging things? Today's focus is on prioritizing joy and human thriving. So you've all heard that saying, living our best lives. That's an old, overused saying, but the focus here is on how does health, wealth, wellness, and joy be something that we can all capture. It should not be for the privileged few. You will hear from Ascend Fellows this afternoon who are tackling issues and making change in communities as well as at the systems level. You'll hear about how to address economic disparities. You'll hear how to build community using art. And most importantly, you'll be able to delight in the joy of honoring families. As well as you will hear from families living here in the Roaring Fork Valley and what are their dreams for their families in their communities. So, be prepared to be inspired. And with that, I thank you for joining us, and then also it is my honor, it is my privilege to welcome our first guest to the stage. So thank you.
For our first conversation, please welcome 4 Ascend Fellows, starting with moderator Anthony Barrows, managing partner and founder of the Center for Behavioral Design and Social Justice. He's joined by Christine Norbert-Beyer, Commissioner of the New Jersey Department of Children and Families, Asia E. Schomburg, Associate Commissioner of the Children's Bureau of the Administration for Children and Families at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and Ebony Underwood, the founder and CEO of We Got Us Now.
Thank you for that delightful reception. And welcome, everyone. Super excited to have an amazing panel here today. And we're going to talk to you about dreams. And dreams are complicated. But the dream that we're going to try to articulate for you today is what the world looks like if we can dream about a world where families have the resources that they need to thrive. And that's going to be built on a society where we actually value families and honor them and their love for their kids. So we're going to hear a lot of examples about spotting readiness for those dreams to be actualized, developing partnerships out in the real world to try to get them moving, and working on actualizing those dreams even when times are difficult. As themes that I think that we're going to be touching on, I want you to look for a few that I'll try to pull threads on as we go, which include questions about expertise. Who counts as an expert and why? Whose voices and insights do we implicitly trust or distrust? How do issues of race and ethnicity and class affect all of the choices that we're making, and where power flows? And how do we think about reaccumulating and redirecting some of that power? And importantly, thinking about what our relationship is with affected communities. So what I'd like to do is start with you, Christine, and I'd like you to talk to us about readiness. So if we're going to dream about a better world and then go fight for it, we need to look for fields that are ripe for planting. And so if you're thinking about readiness, how do you go about looking for signs that we as a society are ready for change? Maybe that our workforce and our institutions can bear some of that change? And importantly, how do we think about maybe inducing change if we're not seeing enough readiness for it?
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. I'm really happy to be here this afternoon. So this is about dreaming big, and the dream that I have is that all children get to grow up in their families. And so that really is the work that we've been focused on at the Department of Children and Families in New Jersey, and really what I feel like my job is every day, and the goal that I have for my Ascend work and then in my everyday work is that we eliminate the need for non-kin foster care, because that's the only way, at least through our systems, we're going to be able to keep families whole and allow children to grow up with their families. And when we talk about readiness or societal readiness, I think there are a lot of signs that society is ready for a change in child welfare and for us to stop removing children from their families. And unfortunately, this country has a significant history of separating families, from slavery to the Indian boarding schools to even recently at the southern border, separating children from their families. But we do it every day in this country in the name of child safety through foster care. And no one really has been screaming about that, and it needs to change. And so when I became the commissioner in 2018, really there's a lot of transformational work happening in the department, but this kinship was really one that I had set forth as a goal for our entire team. And so it is one of our 4 transformational goals, and we've been working on it since 2018. During that time, I started with a listening tour, and in that first year, talked to over 500 parents and children around the state, and then have continued to do that. But it was those initial conversations, and then talking with our staff about their readiness and the need to change at the organization level to be able to place children with relatives. And we have reduced the number of placements just across the board. New Jersey has the lowest rate of placement of children entering foster care to begin with. And now, on top of that, we have a very high rate of children being placed with relatives. And so in that, looking at organizational readiness, the first thing we did was started with a staff attitude survey, because it's one thing to say, this is the goal and now we're all going to move in this direction, but it's another thing to actually get your workforce to start making changes in how the decisions they make. And so we started with this staff attitudes toward kin survey, and from that information, we then put together in all of department goals around kinship. So at first, I had my IT department and HR saying, this has nothing to do with us. When in reality, they're the ones who are developing tools or changing systems to make it easier for the workers to then, make decisions around kin. And so it is an across-the-board goal for the department. And then we used every lever available to us. We changed legislation so that now kin is the priority for placement. So that means the judges are always asking that question. We changed policy internally. We changed practice. We actually changed the structure of units within each of our local offices. And now, as an example, you have to get an exception request to place with traditional foster care versus the exception request to place with kin, which is how we started. So and so it was really important that we remove the barriers for staff and make it easier. We did implicit bias training. There were a number of different things that we did, but it was all with that goal of not only providing the tools and the education and saying we have this big dream, but now how do we actually put that into action? And I'll end with, we did a follow-up survey just in February of 2023, another staff attitude toward kin. And in those, from 2019 to 2023, we saw a significant increase in staff attitudes towards kin in almost every area of the survey. It increased. Staff were less risk averse. Staff felt that they were supported to make the decisions. They had the tools available to them. And in 2021, in January of 2021, it was the first time in our system's history that we had more children placed with kin than in traditional foster care. And that's, continuing. So I think society is ready, families are ready, and now systems need to catch up.
Indeed. Super important questions remain there, including how do we get upstream so that the kinship placements, which are admirably expanding in New Jersey, are even less necessary, right?
Yeah, I have answers to that. That's another panel.
Indeed. And an important thing here, I think, for us all to recognize is that it was important for you to act and think about systems being responsive to the needs of community, even when your staff didn't display a readiness. And by taking those actions and showing them the kind of results it could produce, that's what got them ready. And that's what started to change some of the narratives and attitudes.
Yeah.
So in thinking about how we get stuff done in the world, it's important to think about systems. And what bigger system is there than the federal government? So it's important to think about how do we spot readiness? But once we spot it, we got to do something with it. We have to develop partnerships. We have to go out into the world and take action. So Asia, I'd really like to hear from you some of the things that you all have been working on within the federal government, particularly in response to the hard work that you've been doing to listen to our affected communities about what they want and need, to make some of these dreams start moving into action.
Thanks, Anthony. I think one of the things that I'm most proud of working for the Biden-Harris administration is that we do not make a move unless we've spoken to and been in conversation with impacted individuals, right, and families. And so that was a tone that was set certainly from the time that I was appointed in March 1st of 21. And so we have always been very intentional about how we listen first. So, right, listen, invest, and then how can we support, right? And sometimes doing all of those things at the same time. So, it's so funny, Christine, that you brought up surveys because, during this administration, we, for the first time, actually, across the nation, Black and Native children are disproportionately impacted by foster care. They're disproportionately brought into foster care throughout the nation. And so there's been an emphasis on listening to impacted families from Indigenous families and Black families as well. And during this administration, I guess last summer this time, we, for the first time, held some national roundtables around the Black experience of families that are impacted not only by child welfare, but ACF programs in general. And this was the first time that that had been done. And we just invited what we wanted was the sort of uncurated voices, because a lot of times we have advocacy groups and they're very well, they're very well prepared to come to DC, to have these conversations. You can tell they've been trained, they know exactly what it is to say, what not to say, and sometimes we don't want that. We wanted you to keep it real. So we were looking for the uncurated voices. We went out and we used community-based organizations to help us, to find people that would come and talk to us. The Divine Nine, for example, churches and communities. We really wanted to get to people who wouldn't normally have access to the federal government and to tell us what they need or what more they needed from us. And so, that's an example of how we have listened. We've also been doing tribal convenings. I was late yesterday. I arrived late yesterday afternoon because we had a tribal convening in Region 8 to hear from tribal leadership. Most of you know that the Supreme Court recently ruled in favor of the Indian Child Welfare Act, but this had been something that for the past year was making so many of us very, very nervous. I'm proud to say that, Aspen Institute was very supportive of, what can we do to get the word out about how important it is to support the Indian Child Welfare Act. Well, now we sort of won that battle where the Supreme Court is concerned, but now it's like, okay, the issues remain, and so we want to make sure that we keep the pressure on and keep the energy on in terms of making sure that Indian children can remain with their families and in their communities. So consistently having those conversations. So listening has really been important under this administration, but also investing. Like, what are we doing? How can the federal government help? A lot of times people come to us really, for support, for financial support and funding. And one of the things that I'm also very proud about is that, we, and I talked about this earlier in a workshop, I was in a meeting with some parents probably early last year sometime, and one of the parents said to me, you need to put the money in the community. She said, every time there's the federal government puts out what we call NOFOs, Notice of Funding Opportunities, it's always, we're going to give you money to do this, that, and then do a little bit of this. But she was like, put the money in the community. Let us decide in our communities what it is we need. And her voice never left my head. I can still hear her say, and I still meet with that parent group regularly. So when the opportunity came around what we were going to do in Children's Bureau with our discretionary funds, I asked about a particular sort of vehicle to do a discretionary NOFO called a field-initiated approach. And it's a vehicle that apparently no one has used in a really long time. I asked, my deputy, who has been there for 30 years, whether or not this had happened. He said, not since I've been here. So I don't know if it's ever been done before, but certainly not in a long time. And what it is that we put the money out there and we say to the communities, you tell us how you would use it. You tell us what partnerships you would want to form. You tell us what problem you would want to solve. And in this case, it's a field-initiated NOFO for approaching racial bias in the child welfare system. So really doing things differently, right? Disrupting and doing things differently. And I will tell you, I was advised, actually, when I started to ask about that approach, someone said, why would you do that? Just tell them exactly how they should use the money, right? Mm. But I opted out of that approach. And so actually the deadline for that NOFO was yesterday. So I'm really excited to see what communities say that they need and how they plan to solve those problems. But then also, right, so listen, invest, and then support. And we want to make sure that at the federal government, Children's Bureau, but also my sister agencies, my partners, that we are being as supportive as we can. Are we sitting here in the ivory tower like we're the federal government, all we do is grants here and there, or are we really digging in and leaning in and supporting communities? And so we have to be intentional as well about the support that we provide, not just the support that we think we should be providing, right, but the support that communities, states, local governments tell us that that is needed. So.
Super critical. A couple important threads to pull on here. So we've got to act on what the community tells us that they want and need, but we won't know unless we ask, unless we go out and listen and actively invite people to tell us what they want and need. And importantly, I think one thing that I will try to lift up here is that we can't merely rest our laurels on all of the highly polished voices So I'm an alumnus of the foster care system, but I also have 3 degrees and went to fancy schools. And if you're only talking to me and not to a 14-year-old that's living in a group home or a foster home or a kinship placement today, right now, you're not going to get the right answers. And I think it's a really critically important thing to think about is how we're activating those current voices that are close to the problems right now if we want to get those correct answers. So thank you for that work and figuring out how to put resources into the hands of people who already know how to use them because they're close to the problems. Right. So, okay, we've thought a little bit about how to look for readiness. Where is there readiness for change? Where are those opportunities? We've thought a little bit about how to implement them. And importantly, how to listen to community in implementing what needs to change. And so, Ebony, I'd like to invite you in to thinking about how we can take those moments where the readiness exists. Maybe there's resources, maybe there isn't, but there's a will to fight for a dream that's rooted in the things that we know we need as members of impacted communities. So talk to us about your journey in activating and executing on a dream.
Okay, so I come to this space in 2 ways. The first way is through being a social entrepreneur. And as a social entrepreneur, my pursuit was to ensure the holistic well-being of children of incarcerated parents, children and young adults with incarcerated parents. And then I also come from the vantage point of lived experience. And that was, my father was incarcerated for 33 years of my life. And for most of that, there was no hope. It was like no hope. Life without parole, he was never coming home. And when I was able to understand that, oh my God, it really just really put me in a shell. And so I'll give you some statistics so that you all understand how mass incarceration has surged, the separation of children and families, and the health and well-being of children with incarcerated parents. There are currently almost 5 million children under the age of 18 that have a parent that's incarcerated. And there are over 10 million children who at some point in their life have been impacted by parental incarceration. And so with that understanding as a social entrepreneur and looking at that context, and then having the lived experience, I took a step back and said, wait, how are these systems supporting our families? And what I came to find is that most people look at the issue from the perspective of children under the age of 18, as if there is some magic button at the age of 18, and all of a sudden all the pain and trauma and stigma and shame that come from having a parent that's incarcerated dissipates. And so I said, no, we have to change the narrative. And so I founded We Got Us Now, literally. We got us now, because that's what we had to do. We had to take accountability for ourselves so that others could understand how to best support us. There have been many narratives about, false myths about who children of incarcerated parents were, and that they were doomed for incarceration, which is absolutely not true. I'm one of 4 siblings. None of us have been incarcerated. Our father was incarcerated for 3 decades. Our father remained a consistent father throughout that entire experience. And so that made me say, wait a minute. If the federal government is saying, and the administration at the time is saying that this is an issue, mass incarceration, then I may need to actually say something to help my dad, who had been fighting, who had never stopped being a dad, and his love had never stopped. So I said, I may need to step up and say something. And so I did. And in the process, I discovered so many daughters and sons that were just like me, that were part of this historically invisible population, navigating these systems with no support. And so I decided to build a community for us. And in that community, what we decided to do is look at all of what was happening. Most of the information or most of the research that was being done was deficit-based. And so we decided that, wait a minute, we're gonna look at this issue from a positive perspective. let's look at this issue and figure out how could we best support these systems and sectors as partners, not just participants. Because as participants, people would ask us to come to the table and we would feel tokenized, oftentimes re-traumatized, oftentimes just stigmatized by these false narratives that are continually perpetuated through false data or inaccurate data. And so we wanted to be able to say, you know what, we know what's wrong. And this love is transactional that has happened between us and our parents. Why do I have to, if my father's in a federal prison, I have to travel several states to visit him? I traveled across 8 different states just to visit him. I'm sorry, in 8 different facilities across the United States. That's a different experience than having a parent that's in jail, which is a county jail. That's different than having a parent that is in a state prison. But mind you, there's some big states. California's huge. And so we need to think about, like, what are these simple things that we need to change? And so We Got Us Now has been instrumental in passing 5 pieces of legislation. 2 at the state level, 2 at the federal level, and 1 at the local level. And those are all centered around family integrity, family well-being, and looking at this issue from the perspective of the children, looking through the lens of the children. Stop looking at this issue from the perspective of the parent and what they did wrong. And it's bad enough that they're separated from us. But now, even still in 2023, now we have predatory systems through technology that are totally erasing our in-person contact. And so now, virtual visits have come into play as a means to keep our families connected. And how can we keep our families connected if we can't even, a kid can never understand what it means to be connected to their parent. A 5-year-old would never understand what it would mean to be connected to their parent through a screen. That's not gonna soothe the hurt and pain. That's not gonna soothe the hug that he may need from his mother who has been away for the last 5 years. That's not gonna soothe that. We gotta look at this from a human perspective. And so that's what We Got Us Now has been able to do, has been able to really bring to these different systems and sectors the education and knowledge that we as subject matter experts understand from our lived experience, but also from our professional expertise. And so we have a national network of daughters and sons who are now doing that work.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Your hair.
Oh, sorry.
An amazing lesson in all of that is something that we all need to remember, which is that families love their kids love their parents, and we, as a society, owe it to each other to make sure that they can express that love and feel it. Families need the resources and the opportunities to express their love, because you didn't stop loving your dad when he was inside, and he didn't stop loving you. And we need to do more and better by families, even under those circumstances, to make sure that families can be intact and can experience that love. So we've got a very brief amount of time left on this stage, but I want to challenge my panelists to challenge you with the most extraordinary dreams that they can summon for the future, dreams that might feel so dreamy that they don't even dare to dream them and say them out loud. So I'm going to go from my right to my left and ask you all briefly, maybe in 30 seconds, to articulate a dream that you have for a world that values families and the love that they have for their kids. What do you almost not dare to dream?
A world that prioritizes all of the resources that it can bear, particularly in this country, and there are plenty, and ensures that every family has what it needs, and clears the way for the path for every family to have everything that it needs, includes mental health, substance abuse, that we live by a love ethic, that we set fear aside, those of us who are in positions to do so, that we check our privilege, that we cede our power where we have to, and so that families can have what they need and children can continue to be loved in all aspects of their lives.
Absolutely. Christine?
And building on what Asia said, that we lead with love, that everything that we do, that all of the decisions we make, that we keep children and families at the center of that. And I think we do that through love. You know, I started out by saying my dream was to eliminate the need for foster care or non-kin foster care. I would step it up to say if I had any dream, it would be to end child poverty, because I think that would be the way to get to much of what Asia is dreaming, what Ebony is asking for, and really there would be no need for a child welfare system.
I would say that my dream is to ensure that there's checks and balances, because I don't believe that the prison system is going to end. And so I would dream that organizations like We Got Us Now are being able to be sustained generationally, right? So what we've been able to do, what happens when I leave the work? I want this organization to be able to be sustained for the next 50 years. I mean, thinking about it from the perspective of 50 years of mass incarceration, that's 50 years of policies that we've had to undo. We deserve 50 years of support and resources and capital. So that would be my big dream.
I think that's a great way to end it. So let's give a hand to the panel, and thank you for your time.
Next up, Ascend Fellows, Dr. Daniel Williams, President and CEO of the Steelcase Foundation, and Joe Jones, Founder, President, and CEO of the Center for Urban Families, with Denver-based muralist, artist, and sculptor, Beamer Torres.
Hello, 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 hello. It's so great to see everybody. It's so wonderful to be here with these two incredible leaders and to engage in this conversation. As was said, I'm Daniel Williams. I'm currently the President and CEO of the Steelcase Foundation and a member of the 2021 cohort of Ascend Fellows. And one of the things that as we were sort of thinking about this and talking about it and prepping, I kept going back and reading the title of this session, Eye of the Beholder, but specifically Disruptors at Work. Disruptors at Work. And it had me thinking about, and admittedly, this is something I think about a lot, not just because of this, but this idea of identity and expression. Identity and expression, this idea of like who we think we are, how we show up, how we want to show up, and like how does that get expressed? How do people see that? And what does that mean? And sometimes there's real connectivity between our identity and our expression. Sometimes there might be some tension there. And so sort of in that vein, I was curious, like, do you all see yourselves as disruptors? Is that a part of your identity? Is that something that you think of? Is that something that drives your work? And we'll start with you, Joe, and then we'll go to Beamer.
Yeah, you know, first let me just say how good it feels to be in this room with a group of like-minded individuals fighting for other people, right? But I cannot be my authentic self without saying, what's up? The three's up. The 2018 cohort, right? So I am, I'm a natural disruptor, right? I am a visionary. That's dangerous. You can't have too many people like me in the same space. So I'm very grateful for my team back at the Center for Urban Families in Baltimore, because they help keep me grounded. They allow me to be my authentic self, but they frame how I'm able to go out and do the business that I'm responsible for as an ambassador of the organization. I'm founder and CEO, so they give me that respect, but they also say, here's a timeout chair, Joe. You need to go sit over here for a minute, right? So disruption, I think, I want to be disruptive, but not reckless. And there's a difference, right? I think we all know, based off of past recent experience, how somebody with power who is reckless can leave families feeling vulnerable, create a bunch of uncertainty. And I like the fact that, with this network of folks that we have in Ascend, we all are fighting for the same cause, and we learn from each other. We cross-pollinate. It's great that we can get to DC sometimes when we're there together, but it's really more uplifting when we can have the intentionality of coming to Aspen to be together in a way that allows us to spend time in community and get to know each other below the surface. So for me, disruption without being reckless.
Beamer?
I was a little reckless, man. So growing up in Denver, North Denver, I was inspired by other disruptors, Chicano artists and graffiti artists. And as a teen, not having the knowledge and information that would propel an art career to the next step, I just took it upon myself to create art, and it wasn't with permission. So that eventually led me to a life of trouble. Eventually, I was facing consequences for the things I did. So I had to do some self-reflection and realize that I can use that power for good. So I approached local grants, art grants, and use that money to create that outlet for youth that I didn't have, through reaching out through youth centers, juvenile centers, and getting the kids in there to kind of vibe in that same mindset that I have. Yeah, that's the way that I went from reckless to a disruptor.
I love that. I love that. I love that you just flipped it.
Yeah, I flipped it a little bit.
I want to stay with you on this theme. A common thread for both of you is this passion for providing platforms and spaces and places for young people, young adults, for families to express themselves. Mm-hmm. And Beamer, for you, how did art become that vehicle of expression? You talked about you were doing it, you putting your work out there, and then you were trying to figure out how to sort of move from reckless to disruption. Right. But why? Why art? Why was that your vehicle? And then maybe could you share a little bit about how you see art, and specifically this work you're doing around the creation of community murals as a way to engage and inspire young people?
Yeah, so, just like I said, creating that avenue for young teens to be able to express themselves was really important for me. But also being able to represent indigenous, brown, and black people through my artwork is really powerful because I get to do it at a large scale. I just finished a mural that's 85 feet tall, and it shows an indigenous woman dancing, and that's really important for us to see ourselves in that magnitude, at that power. So that's really important for me to be able to represent the youth in the brown community.
Love it. I love it. Joe, you're doing some incredible work in Baltimore, specifically with families. An important aspect of this you talk about a lot is centering family voice in your work. And so often there's sort of this gap between this articulated value of centering voice and like how that shows up in practice. And so much gets lost in that gap between what we sort of say we value and how we show up day in and day out. And so I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how you ensure that family voice remains at the center of your work day in and day out. And what are some examples of where you've really seen that make a difference?
Yeah, so context. We're located in Baltimore City. We serve all of Baltimore City as a place-based nonprofit. We also have a national-facing arm of the organization. It's called our Practitioners Leadership Institute, so we do some work outside of the state. However, for our place-based work, we are located in West Baltimore, and we're in zip code 21217. And that zip code, as a point of contact, would be the neighborhood where Freddie Gray lived and died while he was in police custody, right? In that zip code, and go back to the building. So we got a 32,000 square foot building we built from scratch, right? Name of the organization is the Center for Urban Families. But our tagline is helping fathers and families work, because we want the community, particularly the men in the community, to understand, although the word families is in the name of the organization, the emphasis is on engaging dads as a part of our work with families, right? So that's on the facade of the building, so when people walk by, guys can see that, right? And within that zip code, there are 17,000 individuals called non-custodial parents, primarily men, but not exclusively. There's some women in it, who owe an aggregate of $28 million in back child support owed to the state, not to the custodial parent, right? There are an additional 4 zip codes, so 5 contiguous zip codes. Of that, there's a group of individuals from those zip codes that owe an aggregate of $120 million in state-owed child support. In addition, those are the top zip codes that people returning from incarceration come back to. It's also the highest poverty rates. So literally, working with that population of parents who live in that zip code, who want the same things we want for our families, right? But it is exceedingly difficult, even if we can help them get a job, right? One of the first things that's going to happen is the state is going to send an order to the employer to garnish their wages. In the state of Maryland, the state can take up to 65% of their W-2 income, right? So the incentive is to go underground. Underground doesn't always mean illegal. It does include illegal activity, but it means working off the books. So you aren't paying taxes. You aren't contributing to society in that way, right? But you want to, right? So that policy issue is something that we have fought for long and hard. And so we connected with our child support director, and we said, hey, this is the issue. It's an issue for the state. You are being dinged on it by the feds because you can't collect debt from this population. So we said to him, we want you to come to our building on Monroe Street in West Baltimore. We don't want to go to you, and we want to bring dads from the community to meet with you, and we want to co-design with you a model that will allow them to get some relief from this debt while they, in return, they work, they get their driver's license reinstated, right? They get an opportunity to participate in the lives of their children. And what we ended up doing is we had a letter that went out to dads who owe child support. It had the logo of the Center for Urban Families and the logo of child support. That led to the legislature becoming interested in it, right? The state then put forward legislation with some legislative champions that then became House Bill 1502 that ultimately became the Step-Up program. It got codified in law in the state of Maryland, all from the voices of these men from West Baltimore who said, we want you to think differently about how you engage with us. We don't trust this system. Every time we've tried to engage with a system, we've gotten burned. And now, as a result, there's been some wins in that legislation, and that's from a prior administration. So we now have been meeting with the new administration, and for Threes Up and for I think it's cohort 2012, you all know that our governor is Ascender Westmore, right? So we will now be taking the voices of dads in Baltimore, working with the administration, having conversations around the state of Maryland about how do you create effective, fair child support policy that will allow dads to come above ground, to be responsible for their children, both financially and otherwise. And that's an example of how you get community voice in an authentic way that leads to policy shifts and change.
Absolutely. That's great. One of the threads that you mentioned community. We talk about community murals. We're hearing the word community a lot over the last couple of days, and sometimes I worry. I'm saying worry. Maybe worry is too strong a word. I wonder. What do we mean when we say community? Like, how are we defining that? I was in a meeting with a partner a couple weeks ago, and she was really excited about what she was working on, and she was like, and we brought in community, and I was like, great, who did you bring in? She was like, all these people from community, and it was wonderful, and I was like, amazing. Who did you meet with? She was like, so many community members, and I was like, that's so great, and I just was like, I just want to get there with you. I feel it, and I wonder sometimes the importance of the specificity of the definition of community in the context in which we are doing our work. How do we do that so that it doesn't lose its meaning or become sort of everything and nothing. And so with that in mind, I wonder, quickly, if you, how do you define community in your work? And then how do you define community in your work?
I believe community is a fellowship between like-minded people. Sometimes they may have similar goals, similar mission. I think this is a great example of community right here. I've been here two days already, and I see it here happening. So, and that's something that I create with the youth when I go into these mural workshops. Is I teach them how to become a community on just the simple task of creating a mural. And because a lot of these youth are actually getting ready to go back into their own communities. So hopefully they can take something from what I showed them, take it back and become their own leaders in their community.
Yeah, for me, it's people who live, work, and play in close proximity to one another. And for me, it doesn't always mean we're on the same page. It's just that we are collectively together by proximity. An example of that in terms of how you can get to a halfway solid outcome. A little over a year ago, we had a young black boy, 14 years old, kill a white male motorist in downtown Baltimore. And the mayor asked a group of us to come together to address this issue called squeegeeing. Short story is we brought together 150 folks, a cross-section of Baltimore stakeholders, from people who are executives of businesses, financial institutions, nonprofit, philanthropy, homeboy, homegirl on the street, right? Out of that came level setting. There was some discomfort in the conversation around racist policies and oppression. We dealt with all of that, but in a respectful way. And out of that came a relationship between an executive of a financial institution, of a bank, and a young black boy from Baltimore who had a bank account. And because of the relationship building, they exchanged phone numbers. And one day, the young black boy went to cash his check and couldn't get his check cashed because he didn't have his ID. He called his banker friend, who was the executive of that bank, who interceded on his behalf. Because we created this community, and there weren't like minds that came together initially, but it built a bridge and a bond when people exchanged phone numbers and dealt with each other with respect and trust.
Love it. Love it. Bridges and bonds. Real quick, we have a couple minutes left, and we'll start, Joe, with you, and then we'll end with Beamer. But as a little bit of a shift, as leaders, as men of color, what myths and misconceptions are you consistently challenging?
As a person of color, as a man of color, as a black man in this country, I know that I make America inconvenient sometimes, right? I know that I am not always valued, and I'm okay with that, but I'm not going to allow you to treat me or disrespect me, right? And for me, it is really, how do you create the conditions where somebody can say something to you and you don't overreact? Like an example, Wes Moore, before Wes announced that he was running for governor, I interviewed him for a charity we both, care about. And I went to ask, I ended up having conversations with his mother. And when I was talking to her about something unrelated, I said, Joy, do you worry about Wes and whether or not, he is going to be a target as a black man? She said, I worry about him all the time. She said, I worry because I'm concerned that if he's out jogging, he has his earpods in, the police ask him to stop, he may not hear him and they may overreact. So I decided I didn't want to bring up that interview question with Wes unless I asked my own mother about me. I asked my mom, I said, do you worry about me still? She said, I worry about you every day, right? And so even though you can have accomplishments in this country, sometimes you will be left behind and be seen as a threat. Even though you may wear a suit and tie, you may present yourself a little bit differently. I think that's one of the challenges we face. And we are accomplished and we can do well, and we are not a threat.
Yeah. So through my artwork, like I said earlier, I create a lot of imagery of brown, indigenous, and black people. With that, like I said, I wanted to portray them as powerful and leaders of the community. So that's one of the ways I do it. Also, by me going into this lane and being an artist, where I may be perceived as, I have limits to what I can do, and the only thing you can be is, who knows, a farmer or a construction worker. So I'm breaking that mold by creating these avenues and being an artist, and just showcasing the youth in my community that there's other opportunities out there, that you can become anything you want. There's really no limit to what you can do.
We're going to leave it there. Thank you both for being incredible human beings, and thank you all for taking some time.
Now please welcome moderator Jillian White of Capital B News, with Ascend Fellows Kwame Anku, Chairman and CEO of Black Star Fund, Dr. Sharice West Scantlebury, President and CEO of the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation, and Andrea Levere, founder of Enterprise Capital Institute.
Good afternoon. Good to see y'all again. I told you you would get sick of me, and here I am. I really cannot overstate how excited I am to have this conversation to moderate about wealth and well-being. I started out my career in the big bad, banking, and was an economist, and then became a reporter covering issues of wealth and equity, specifically through a racial lens. So the folks on this stage are the reason that I do the work that I do. They are the people whose ideas and solutions and thoughts I wanted to bring to communities, and communities of color in particular. So just want to name that because this is a huge honor for me. And I also want to start out, we've linked a lot of things over the past couple of days. And Wendy Thomas, who's one of the founders of MLK 50, always says something really specific about poverty that I feel like is useful to share here. And she says, poverty is not an accident, it's a robbery. And yeah. And that has always stuck with me and really resonated again yesterday when we were talking about the lens through which we view resources, and this idea that we have been tricked into this scarcity mindset. The idea that if this group wins, I lose, and thus I must hoard these resources for myself. So I wanted to just put that out as a little bit of foundation for what we're talking about. We're talking about whether or not well-being can exist in the society we have without wealth. So my first question is going to be a rapid fire yes or no. Andrea, I'm going to start with you. Can well-being exist in our society without wealth?
No. Wealth is necessary, but as we heard from our Native American colleagues yesterday, it is not sufficient alone for well-being. I spent 3 decades focused on building wealth at the household level. We saw the transformational impact of assets. My favorite data point, a child with a savings account with as little as $500 for college is 3 times as likely to go to college and 4 times as likely to graduate than a child without. Today, I'm focused on how do we build wealth for nonprofits, the essential businesses in our community, and help to address that scarcity mindset.
Sharice?
So wealth is, can support well-being, but well-being is not a necessary or guarantee byproduct of wealth.
Yeah, Kwame?
I do not think you can have well-being without wealth.
Okay.
I'll answer more in the next one.
Great. So Andrea, I want to go back to you because I think we want to go a little bit through the life cycle of wealth accumulation, and I want you to start by talking about that focus on children and savings, and where that came from, in particular because that has become such a widespread idea now, but it was an idea that you were working on for so long. What is it about savings for a young child that creates such a different trajectory for them? And then talk a little bit about the work you're doing now.
So it's not just for the child, it's also for the parent, right? Because one of the things we know, if you do not imagine that your child can go to college, then it probably won't happen. So one of the most important research projects has really been about creating a college saver mentality, which then gives you the expectation that this is possible for you, and then it changes the trajectory of your life and also changes how your parents or caregivers think about you over time. And I think one of the most important things is to make this universal. We began just focusing on low-income children, but we realized that what we wanted to do is make it normal for everybody. So it wasn't as if just certain children got savings or matches, but all children did, and they all participated. And then that became part of the curriculum, so they think about that over time. So let me just say, in terms of the work that I'm doing now, I just want to ask 3 very quick questions. How many of you went into your field of nonprofit because you love finance? How many of you know the business model of your nonprofit? A few, right? How many of you think that the capital markets that we have today for social outcomes work effectively? All right, that's the problem we are trying to solve. Nonprofits are enterprises, just like the companies Kwame's going to talk about. They need the same kind of long-term, flexible capital that for-profit companies need, but they need it even more because they are solving problems the market cannot solve. So exactly, right? So they need the capital to build the infrastructure, to invest in human capital, the people that they need, to innovate, to create that product innovation, and they need it in ways that help them understand that this capital is available for them, not just for 1 year, not just for restricted uses, but over the long term. We call this capital enterprise capital because it's funding at the enterprise level. And it really is most effective when it's paired with the kind of technical assistance that would have helped you answer the question. People who can say, nerds like me, this is the business model. And this is how your business model determines what is the financial model that is going to take you to sustainability. The bottom line is this increases the return on investment or the impact of nonprofits because they can focus on their mission and they can build towards achieving that mission. And it improves the return on investment of funders because fundamentally it helps them achieve the impact that their philanthropic dollars aim to achieve. And the good news is we have some very visionary funders who are doing this.
Sharice, I want to come to you next to talk about your work. You're focused on equity and using economics really as a way to get at that. What are some of the most promising tools or innovations or ideas that you've come across and that you are excited about when it comes to achieving equity?
Sure. So I want to give a disclaimer because I don't want nobody to meet me in the lobby and be like, oh, what have you done? What are your outcomes? Where's your theory of change? Don't ask me because I don't have any, okay? Nor do I have all those answers. But what I do have is a desire for our nonprofits to thrive and be sustainable. And so the answer to your question is, we were actually doing enterprise capital and investment without even knowing it had a name. And we started out with our community development financial institutions, CDFIs. So Southern and Hope would be examples of equity capital that we did in both of those organizations. We did not want to see dividends. We did not expect a return, other than the fact that these organizations that we helped to co-found still exist today and have reached over billions of dollars in the type of lending that they do to the unbanked and those who are not able to get products from traditional banks. So we had already started doing that without knowing it had a formal name. And that's why you have brilliant people like Andrea to give stuff like that a formal name. So we want to then do this now with our nonprofits and actually invest in the balance sheet side of their, invest in the asset side of their balance sheets so that when we do this, we are able to say to I don't know if I can call them grantees if you get an enterprise capital fund, right? ECs, I got to figure out a new name. Investees, so that they can use those dollars to, by God, invest in the stock market, reserve funds, buy equipment, capital, actually use that cash to leverage loans or to leverage additional dollars so that it's not a grant that is, one-time purpose or the like, but it actually is an investing in that organization. I think about, I have 2 grantees in the room, Arkansas Advocates, Our House, formerly of Our House, Georgia, and I say to myself, wow, so if we had over 10 years, we probably have done, I'm guessing, $2 million in grants to probably each of those organizations. Wow, what if I was able to say to my board, we're going to do this $2 million, because we've done it already, we've already given it. But this $2 million will be used different from just general operating support to actually enabling this organization to invest in ways that will help it to be sustainable and to grow over time. That is the shift that we're planning to make at the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation, and I'm grateful to my board and to my team for their creativity for wanting to walk this with me.
Kwame, as we talk about shifts and kind of imagining a different way to do things that actually resonates with the community it's meant for, sure. This is the baseline of what you've done. We've all seen the abysmal stats when we look at VC funding, when we look at funding at kind of that high level, both in terms of founders and entrepreneurs who are people of color or minority groups who get that, and also when you look at the other side of the table of the people who are giving it. It's just pretty terrible. And you've also said it does not work for the community of entrepreneurs that we're trying to serve. So can you talk a little bit about the ways that you're trying to shift the model and also the results you've had, because that's pretty wild.
Sure, so thank you for that. Thank you for having me. I do want to say around why I think that you can't have the well-being without having the wealth. But in order to do that, I think I have to share with you what my definition of wealth is. And I'm happy that we're having this conversation, right? Because a lot of times we shy away from even the word wealth, and understand why, right? When 1% of the population is controlling 80, 90% of the wealth, you have a fundamental problem. I think of money as fuel that's embodied in a seed. And I think of wealth as a verb. It's an action of multiplying exponentially that fuel. And the reason it's a verb is because the verb has to do with intentionality of the action. If our intention is to fuel our communities, invest in our communities, to transform them, to create well-being, that's a very, very positive thing. The state of play right now is that system, that capitalist system, is painfully exploitative, as we all know. So I want to be really clear. When I'm saying that, I'm not saying that as an advocate for our current system. I'm saying it because I'm looking at it through a different lens. And Jillian, this is how we created Black Star Fund, an investment fund investing in Black entrepreneurs. So I went into the thing saying, look, this isn't just flawed because Black and brown founders are not included. It actually doesn't work because it's based on a majority failure model. Let me explain what I mean. Venture capital today is based on a 70% majority failure model. The best of Silicon Valley invests in companies, waiting for 70% of them to fail. Now imagine if we all started a high school together and we said we're going to look for 1,000 top students. We're going to engage 100 of those students in families. We're going to offer 50 of them positions in our school. 10 of them are going to matriculate. And then we're going to wait to see signs of 7 out of 10 of them failing or having problems. And then we're going to kick them out. And then just focus on 2 of them to hopefully get into a good school. And one of them is going to be the hero to represent the school. That is venture capital as it stands today. Now, if that's what you're doing for the model for white males that went to Stanford and MIT, how's that model going to work out for us? Not particularly well. So I went into it saying, we're going to transform venture capital, not just have inclusivity for black and brown people. We're going to transform the whole thing. So we said, we're going to create the Motown of venture capital in the same way that Motown transformed the music industry. We're going to transform venture capital. So here's what we were able to produce. Remember, 70% failure. We invested in 20 companies, which means we should have lost 14 by now after 4.5 years. 4.5 years later, 19 out of 20 is still standing today. 1 in 2 of them did $1 million in annual recurring revenue last year. 1 in 4 of them is doing multi-millions right now, creating jobs, creating opportunities. And this is an all-black portfolio, 50-50 gender parity, in every industry you could dream of, in every corner of the United States. And all of that was done during COVID, a 1.5 years with no vaccine, all the geopolitical upheaval, a schizophrenic stock market, with an all-black portfolio. Now, is that because I'm such a brilliant investment banker? No.
Yes, it is.
No, my son will tell you, it was me and him watching Shark Tank and The Prophet. That was my training. You sitting over there, he'll attest to it. No, the reason we got those results is because we looked at the whole thing differently. We knew the value of the people and entrepreneurs in our community. We knew what they would do. If not only they had the investment capital, but then they had the wraparound business development services and support. So we were investing in our own communities in ways that other people were overlooking and undervaluing us. We were looking for us and valuing us, investing in us, wrapping services around us. And that's how we were able to get the results that we got so far.
Can I drill down on that for one more second?
Sure.
What are the things that you think you were able to see in black entrepreneurs and black founders and you were able to nurture to get them where they are that other people were undervaluing?
Sure, I mean, look, my folks are not from this country. Right? My father's from a village in Ghana with no running water and no electricity. My mother was born in London and raised in a foster family in South Wales. Right? So our story is like the American first-generation story. So what I've seen is folks of color and immigrants and people who have been historically maligned, marginalized, exploited, left out, overlooked. There's a resilience in our communities that allows us to perform and outperform in extraordinary ways in every industry that we get our hands on. 40 years of not playing in Silicon Valley, 40 years of not playing in the game of could I create a Google or a Facebook or any of these enterprises, I was like, oh, what if we got our hands on that game? With the resilience and the grit and the shared life experience. So it's the painful thing about being marginalized and overlooked and exploited and all those things, we know what that is. But what comes also from that experience is the ability to see things other people don't see, to do things that other people don't do. And the resilience of being knocked down 7 times and getting up 8, that's what's required for any entrepreneur to be successful, regardless of ethnicity and gender. So if we're coming to the table almost over-indexing with resilience and grit and faith and trust in ourselves, and then what if you had the person who was writing the check not trying to take advantage of you or exploit you, but believing in you and helping you? And to be really honest, I've been an entrepreneur that's had the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. So who better to support and be there for our entrepreneurs than somebody who's had incredible success and also knows what it's like to have 2 cars repossessed, who knows what it's like to live in a motel for 14 months trying to get a business to work as a single father with a 4-year-old son sleeping on the floor, who's now managing tens of millions of dollars to transform communities. I know what that pain is like because I've lived it. I know how good we are because I'm from our communities. And if we don't invest in ourselves and each other and fundamentally believe that we can do it, how in the world are you going to expect anybody else to do it? So it's really about leadership by leading by example And I wanted to show the world that we could do it not only as well, but quite frankly, better than it's been done before. Thank you.
Andrew and Charisse, I want to come back to you to talk a little bit more about the idea of enterprise investing in the nonprofit space, which I think is, you know, for me, this is a novel concept. I think for a lot of people it is. You don't necessarily put these things together. So I'm wondering, one, how widespread do you think in the nonprofit sector that type of investing mindset is? And two, how do all of the people, you know, myself included, who are out there looking for philanthropic help, how do you have conversations and suss out funds that are thinking in an enterprise mindset versus some of the more traditional molds we've seen? Andrea, I want to start with you.
So something very wonderful happened in the first panel. Anybody notice? Aisha talked about the field-initiated approach. What was she talking about? She was talking about enterprise capital. She was exactly talking about doing funding, federal funding, in a different way. Listening to the community and identifying how they would use those funds. So what I'd say is, A, and Charisse can talk about this more, there's a whole bunch of funders who have been moving in this direction. And one thing I've learned in the work I've been doing is start with those people first. Don't try to convince folks who think that highly restricted, very project-specific, 1-month grants are the way to go. That's really not the way, right? Think about people who have a very different view of the world. And then think about people who understand the costs of having the kind of capital markets, and I use that intentionally, that we use to fund social outcomes, whether they're the outcomes Kwame is trying to achieve or the outcomes Charisse has been achieving over the years. And then my goal is to really turn enterprise capital into a philanthropic asset class. I know that sounds like fancy business school language, but it's really a best practice, not an only practice. There are many other ways we may want to give grants, right? But it is a best practice that people understand can achieve better outcomes over time. The most important lesson I learned in business school is the key to financial strength is matching sources to uses of funds, right? You don't buy a house with a short-term line of credit. You buy a house with a 30-year mortgage. That's the way it makes it affordable and sustainable. That's what we need to do for nonprofits who are trying to solve the most urgent problems. And they need that kind of funding, but they also need to be able to ask for what it takes to get the job done, not what they think they can get. And so we need to provide an abundance mindset that can help them do that, because we're only going to change this market if both sets of stakeholders, the nonprofits and social enterprises, and the philanthropists and public sector agencies understand that they can create better outcomes by helping organizations build their financial strength and resilience.
Beautiful. So good old-fashioned organizing and voice is one way in which I would say nonprofits need to come together and actually demand from your funder to look at this differently. That's really all I got. Because it's through voice and through collective action that that change will occur. So that if you're in a region, Baltimore, you know, you get 10 folk together and actually approach Annie Casey, Baltimore Community Foundation, and say, here's how this could work, here's what this would look like. Would you go on this journey with me? Now, of course, you're going to get those who will say, no, I don't know what that is, right? But if you keep at it and keep organized, you can get that change. So that's one way in which I would suggest that nonprofits do that. I know we're responsive at the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation. I know that not all my colleagues are. So that's one way. The other is you just kind of have to say, again, going through your own business models, how would we use these types of grants? How would you use $100,000 if you start there? That would be a 2-year or 3-year grant, and say to your funder, here's how I would want to use this differently to multiply our impact. And again, that is putting the onus on you, but that kind of innovation at your funder may have to start with you, because these folk are trying to feel good with their charity and their grant making. They're not necessarily trying to build sustainability and long-term impact. So it's you who may have to initiate that shift in that mindset versus expecting that from philanthropy. Now, I do plan to do my part, along with Ford Foundation. I know Heron has been doing this, Robert Wood Johnson, and Flint Fund, and a few others. There's not a lot. So there's not like a whole bunch. There are a handful of us who are going in this direction. And, so we will be the trendsetters, because, I like trendsetting. We will be the trendsetters. I'm in the class of the second to none. We are the trendsetters of all things. So I want to make sure that we do that. However, when I think about my colleagues that are more regional community foundations, again, I'm not trying to stereotype, although I have been in this business quite a long time, that kind of innovation may not happen for you. So you may have to bring that innovation. And let them know that it is important for nonprofits to innovate, to do design thinking, to fail, to try again. All of those things are important as we try to address these issues that we're addressing in our communities. So that's how I would respond, is to say that kind of just good old-fashioned organizing and building voice and collective action to push philanthropy to think about this differently. Yeah. And you're going to get a lot of resistance, because it is a behemoth of an institution, but it can be moved.
So I'm really enjoying the challenge construction of the final question, but I'm going to give you guys an option, because we have this pro panel who I want to take to every funder meeting I've ever had. So you have the option. You can either issue a challenge, or you can give the audience your best tip for them thinking about their finances and building sustainability. Either one. Kwame, I'm starting with you.
Sure. So I would say, I won't give you the challenge. I would just say that one of my favorite quotes of all times was from Wayne Dyer: when you change the way you see things, the things that you see change. And I would say that the way that Andrea shared with us, just a child with a savings account of $500, what that does differently for the trajectory, that's new information. There's extraordinary information that's free on YouTube all over the world around ways to not only create wealth and generational wealth, but also the impact that will have not only on our own families, but on our own communities. So I guess in some ways I am making a challenge to you. How much time are you spending learning about wealth creation? How much time are you spending on how to actually create that for your families and your communities? And if it's not that much, my challenge to you is, 1, it needs to be more time. And then 2, be part of making those change agents happen in your own communities. How do you support entrepreneurs so they can be creating wealth-generating machines within your community?
Sharif?
So my best tip would be, start with your long-term funders, right? So we have been funding advocates. We were one of the founders for over 30 years, and Our House for 10 years. So again, I'm sure in those 10 years, if I added it up, that's a whole bunch of money, right? And so if you start with your long-term funders to say, you've already invested $20 million in us over X amount of years. If we had invested, or you have granted to us, if we had invested that differently, where would we be today? So I would start with that long-term funder, offer them a different business model, and with a focus on enterprise capital. And from there, get them to see a different way of investing in your organization versus giving you grants.
Andrea, close us out.
So I hope Sharice doesn't yell at me. But Sharice and her team and a consortium of funders are building a $50 million enterprise capital fund for Arkansas. And to me, this is so powerful. No criticism intended. It's not something groovy happening in the Bay Area or in New York. It's happening in a poor state that desperately needs these resources. And I think that the power of this network to help make that happen would be fantastic.
I just want to thank our panelists for sharing your ideas, your success, helping us figure out how to move on to the next steps to make our businesses sustainable. Please join me in thanking them for this masterclass. And now for our final conversation, please welcome our moderator, Ascend Fellow, Bill Jager, Strategic Initiatives Officer at the Lohr Foundation, with 4 parent experts from the Roaring Forks Own Valley Settlement: Tina Alvarez, Karina Lara, Ivan Lara, and Lizeth Zamorano.
So excited to be here for our final panel of the afternoon and to be on this stage on a theme of creating communities of joy. And I'm thankful and humbled to be here with 4 parent leaders who are creating communities of joy right here in the Roaring Fork Valley, and who are going to offer us insights on what we can take away. Our 4 parent leaders are involved with the Valley Settlement nonprofit here. And I just want to give a little bit of background on Valley Settlement to ground the conversation and the work that this amazing organization does. Valley Settlement was founded as a project of Manaus in 2011 with generous support from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, and incorporated as a standalone 501c3 nonprofit in 2016. Valley Settlement's mission is to listen to Latina families and together create opportunities for early childhood and adult education, connection, and growth so children and families can thrive. Valley Settlement operates right here in the Parachute to Aspen region and works with Latina families through 6 free 2-generation programs to promote early childhood development, advance opportunity, and reduce barriers to accessing vital community services. Those programs include Learning with Love, a home visitation program and group class for parents and toddlers; El Busacito Preschool, serving children with bilingual preschool right in their neighborhoods; Family Friend and Neighbors, supporting in-home childcare providers with education and coaching; adult-focused programs, including Parent Mentor, which brings volunteers directly into elementary schools to support in-classroom learning; lifelong learning and adult education program; and ALMA, a peer-delivered support for women, program supporting women experiencing perinatal depression. I feel fortunate to have ridden El Busacito, to have joined Parent Mentors in schools, to have sat in on a Learning with Love class, and worked with Valley Settlement's amazing executive director, Maria Rodman, who's joining us here today. I now want to turn to our parent leaders who are creating joy in this region: Tina, Karina, Yvonne, and Lizeth. We're going to begin with a question for all of our panelists and appreciate the interpretation support from Sophia as well. So we will begin, right, going down the line, Karina. What brings you joy in your community today?
My family. I think they bring me joy, being part of the community, being part of learning with love, learning with my children every day, going to the classes, meeting the neighbors, knowing the community, the resources we have, and being part of it. Because we talk about community, but how can we be part of it? So I really enjoy how we learn with the kids.
Thank you. Yvonne?
As my wife mentioned before, enjoying any activity with my family, it brings me joy for sure. And enjoying with the community, as you can see on here, we have rivers, mountains. We go to the library together to Learning with Love and so many other programs that Valley Settlement has done. And you can see all your friends, families, and neighbors doing the same time with you. So as a community, we all bring together to have fun together as a big family, just not the blood family, but the community family.
Is that?
Me agrada que haya programas de apoyo, soporte y superación para la comunidad hispana, como el programa Padre Mentor, que es un programa donde los padres voluntariamente ayudamos en las escuelas primarias a los maestros y niños en diversas necesidades.
It makes me happy that our community has so many programs for support and for overcoming issues for the Latino community. I love participating in the Parent Mentor program, which is a program where parents voluntarily help teachers and students in the elementary schools and support them with their diverse needs.
También las clases de inglés y los lugares recreativos y educativos como Community Center, la biblioteca y los parques donde puedo llevar a mis hijas libremente a disfrutar y aprender.
Also English classes and the opportunities to learn with recreation centers, education, community centers, the libraries, and the parks where my daughter can play freely and enjoy.
Y me tranquiliza la seguridad que hay en las escuelas y en las calles porque he visto que las autoridades siempre están alerta.
And the peacefulness that we have here makes me happy. It's a safe place to go to school and a safe place to play, and the authorities are always alert.
Thank you. Tina?
First of all, thank you all for being here and thank you for inviting us. What brings me joy is my family, my friends, community. What really brings me joy is going, exercising, taking care of myself. Because I do believe we are a mind, body, and a spirit. And I believe that if we are okay, then we can only share that okayness with everybody and with our community, starting with our kids. So that's what really brings me joy. Thank you.
The themes of community, connection, living in relationship with each other, our children, and ourselves are things that I think we all can connect with. The next question I'm going to ask Karina and Lizeth to share their thoughts on. And I want to note, I think it's an inspiring question and one that I'm jealous that you get to answer in front of your children. What are the dreams that you have for yourselves and your children?
I think being able to raise my kids with values in this community, and I don't want to choose between my career and being a mom. So I think it will be great. Like my dream is to have affordable childcare in the community where I can be able to work and also being with my kids, with my family, not just one of them. Like to support my family economically. I think a lot of people here have to choose between working in another field or staying with the family. I don't want that, so my dream is to do both.
Que nuestra comunidad siga siendo segura para mí y mi familia, que mis hijas crezcan con valores morales y espirituales.
That this community continues to be safe for myself and my daughters, and that they grow up with values and morals.
Que haya oportunidades y facilidades de estudiar la universidad, como más becas o financiamientos accesibles y que sea dentro del valle.
That there are opportunities and options for them to be able to go to the university, to have the resources to be able to study, and to be able to do that here in this valley.
Y también que haya más lugares recreativos y de aprendizaje para mis hijas, como museos de ciencia, de arte y actividades familiares.
And for my kids to have access to more recreational and educational activities, for instance, museums of natural history and science, so that they can continue learning.
Thank you. Because we have some time, I'm going to offer this question to our entire panel, and we'll start with Tina and come to Yvonne, and then Lizeth and Karina, feel free to offer your thoughts as well. We are fortunate to be in a room here of dreamers and doers, people who can have impact on a wide scale, and so your thoughts around how we make change to make these dreams a reality for you and all families are things that you have a receptive audience for. And so the question, Tina, if you could ask community or state leaders to do or change one thing to make it easier for you to reach your dreams for you and your children, what would it be?
I will ask them to invest in the future of our country, which is our families, which is our children. I want them to spend more time researching and doing some more programs with families to get educated, because I do believe that education starts at home. If we have healthy families, if we have healthy children, the four consequences from that will be that we will have healthy communities who supports each other and helps each other.
Thank you.
Besides my wife's dreams, I also dream to own a place where I can call home, so where my son can grow and play around. And honestly, the market is kind of high, skyrocketing here. So I will say a program for affordable housing, especially for the local employees, because a lot of the time the employees that work here in the community, they have to either rent or buy their house hours away from where they work, which take time from their family, time that they can spend and enjoy with their family, because they cannot afford to live nearby where they work. So I will say affordable housing programs will be a good idea, or programs where they can funds so they can borrow money to buy and pay the rents or the houses.
Lizeth and Karina, anything you would add around changes you would want to see?
Well, my dream is to have, to be able to be with my family and to work professionally. So I want to work here in the Valley, doing what I love and what I study for, but I can't because I want to spend time with my family, and if I have to choose, I will choose my family. So a lot of people are quitting the jobs because they have to choose same thing, right? So being able to have programs such as Valley Settlement has Bucecito, which is a preschool where you can leave your kid there learning, like in a preschool, you know they're professional, not just a neighbor, a babysitter that you don't know. You have to trust because you have to work. So I don't want that. I want to leave my kids like in a safe place, so, and work at the same time. So.
Que aumentaran la seguridad en las escuelas, como que intensifiquen las medidas de seguridad en las entradas y salidas de los adultos y niños, con lo cual yo como madre me sentiría más tranquila.
I want them to improve school safety, for example, security measures of who's going in and out of the school. As a mother and a parent, that would make me feel a lot better.
Y que incluyan más valores morales, como el respeto, la tolerancia, la justicia, la responsabilidad, la honestidad, la empatía y la compasión.
And also that we teach more values and morals, for instance, respect, justice, empathy, ¿qué más?
Compasión.
Compassion,
responsabilidad,
responsibility,
tolerancia,
and tolerance.
Affordable housing, affordable childcare, engaged families, safe, happy, healthy children. These are things that we all share as values, and the panels before us and the conversations we've been having here all point to a committed community that is eager to help lower the barriers to those things. I want to offer a question to each of you, and we'll start with Tina and make our way back. What advice would you give to people working to build communities that create joy for all children and families?
The advice I will give them is to really look into the communities, to talk to us, to research, to make sure you guys go into the bottom and know that we're there, that we want to help you guys too, that we want to make our communities safe. The advice that I give them is help us with mental health illness. Help us create more programs where we as parents can have healthy kids, where we have healthy communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Dee.
Primero que nada, quiero agradecer a esas personas por el trabajo que hacen y el interés que muestran al ayudar a las familias en todas las áreas posibles.
First, I want to thank the people for doing this work and the interest they have in helping families and making changes for people all over the place.
Que sigan extendiendo la ayuda y los recursos a más comunidades, porque en lo personal el programa Padre Mentor me ha ayudado a socializar y a conocer la interacción y educación de los maestros hacia mis hijas.
To continue extending help and resources to our community. For me, a program that has helped me a lot personally is the Parent Mentor program. That has helped me have interactions in my child's education and work with the teachers of my daughters, as well as English classes that have helped me a lot in being able to navigate the language.
Y que no se detengan ante nada, porque su apoyo y preocupación por la comunidad nos motiva a seguir adelante y nos impulsa a superarnos.
And to not stop for anything, because these supports and these resources help motivate us to continue working and to continue moving forward and overcoming.
Thank you.
As well as her, first of all, I want to thank everyone for all that you guys do, the founders and volunteers. Thank you, and keep doing what you guys are doing. And also, I think it should be a way to find a way to reach more people, because I know a lot of people don't know about all the programs that the community offers. So I will think of ways of going either to church or community activities to promote all the organizations and programs that the community offers for those that are in need. And also, this one is more for the previous question, to bring programs for, to train people like for the trade jobs, because I know not everyone wants to go 4+ years to a college, but they want to have a profession. So to find programs to train people to have a little profession so they can even implement their way of living, their well-being.
First, thank you for all you do. I think I will just ask them to expand the resources to all the Valley. I know a lot of people that they don't know about the programs, the great programs we have, and how we can help. As parents, we want to be able to get involved and help. Like, how can we do it? We don't have information on how can we get involved, or how can we talk to other families in the Valley so they can know they have a place where they can go, they can look for help for programs to grow.
Thank you. Final question, one that I'm hoping anyone can chime in on. What is your challenge to all of us here as leaders around how we make the world a place where all children are healthy and thriving?
That's hard. I think we have been talking about children's safety for the past, I think, an hour, 2 hours. And we talk about how can we help kids in the school, kids in high school, after high school and college, or kids, teens suffering from addiction, mental health, suicide. In the community, we have a lot of problems like that recently. But we haven't focused on the kids, the little ones, because if we focus on the families, like how can we help our kids, like teach our kids, spend time with them, so we are not gonna end up in this kind of situations, right? Trying to help them. I don't trust a lot of people when it comes to my kids. I don't know if I'm the only one, but I need to make sure a background check or something. Like, I'm sorry, but I'm a mom. I need to make sure my kids are safe. And my parents, when I was a kid, they had to work a lot. So I didn't spend a lot of time with them, but I want to provide the time to my kids. And yeah, so many things in my mind. I can't.
Thank you, Karina. That challenge to elevate mental health, well-being, beginning in the earliest years, and the time that parents need to be able to do that.
My challenge for you guys will be, go out there and ask people how they're doing. My challenge will be, ask your kids how they're doing, how they're really doing, how they're feeling today. My challenge will be is going on the side of yourself right now and say hi to the next person. Care for each other. That will be my challenge. To care for somebody else and be nice to them. That will be my challenge. Thank you.
I will challenge to get more involved in the community. As they were saying earlier, sometimes we ask people that they are already trained to what they will say, they are already trained to well spoken and everything. As you can see, as we had more trouble talking to you guys. So I'll say, just go to the community, go to the events and talk to people. Talk to those parents who need your help. Talk to the parents that are going to the trouble, to the parents that are struggling with their kids, struggling with paying rent, struggling, try to find what the community is struggling on. And then we can start focusing on where the needs are and how we can start changing those needs and find the solutions for it.
Es muy importante para mí que se inculque en toda la juventud que estudien una carrera y pues mi desafío sería para ustedes sería que pues sí que implementen más pues facilidades y accesibilidad para que todos puedan alcanzar ese sueño de estudiar, que no haya barreras económicas o de que tienen que irse lejos, sino que haya aquí dentro del valle lugares donde ellos puedan estudiar una carrera.
Something that's really important to me is that we teach our youth how important it is for them to study. And my challenge to you all is to keep on working to provide the opportunities and remove the barriers to having access to study, to remove the economic barriers, to remove the barriers of distance, so that we have those opportunities here in our valley to have that dream of being able to go to college.
Y acerca de las escuelas, la seguridad de las escuelas, no conozco las razones, o sea, cómo manejan la seguridad, pero yo he visto que sí falta esa intervención en asegurarse de quién entra y quién sale, tanto los adultos como los niños. Y yo que he estado en la escuela participando en el programa de Padre Mentor, me he dado cuenta que falta eso y la verdad sí me causa intranquilidad. Sabemos que desgraciadamente suceden cosas y sí tienen seguridad de que nos alertan de que hubo una amenaza, aunque haya sido broma, lo que sea, pero siempre uno está así como que, o sea, ¿será que va a entrar alguien que ellos piensan que no es una amenaza y porque no le piden como un ID o no tienen detector de armas? No sé cuál sería la solución, pero es algo muy importante para mí.
And the other thing, going back to school safety, I don't understand exactly how decisions are made to deal with school safety, but I feel like there's some lacking about who is going in and out of our schools as much as with adults as with kids. And I've seen this because I work in the schools with the Parent Mentor program. And it's something that really worries me because sadly we know that terrible things happen in schools. And while they send us alerts about, oh, there's a bomb threat or whatever issue, what if someone comes in who isn't seen as a threat and we didn't get their ID or they didn't go through a weapons check? So that's something that's really important to me and that causes me a lot of worry.
Well, I know that as a parent myself, everything you spoke to, each of you today, resonates. And more than that, in a room of advocates and practitioners, your call to listen and partner together is well heard. Your hopes and dreams are now all of our hopes and dreams. In this room of dreamers and doers, your words matter and will ripple beyond our conversation today. I want to thank Valley Settlement and the entire Valley Settlement team here for showing us the way. And to each of you, Tina, Karina, Yvonne, and Lizeth, for your leadership and expertise. Thank you.
Please stay seated for a few brief words from my colleague, the incomparable Lori Severance, Director of Leadership Programs at Ascend.
Thank you, Chidi. A little over the top, but thank you. First of all, can we have one more round of applause for everybody who spoke today? And I want to thank every one of you, fellows, partners, Valley Settlement, and other wonderful community leaders, and everyone on live stream for choosing to be here, for saying, I care. I care about all of our families, all of our children, and I care about building community. And you showed that you cared by showing up and giving the most valuable, one of the most valuable things you have, your time to be here. So thank you. The Aspen VisionXChange is a gathering of dreamers and doers. Dreamers who know that dreams are complicated, but that we can help solve them by putting money in the hands of the communities who know most what to do with them. Who ask, how can we create the Motown of venture capital? Who know that our communities can be safe for our children and places where our children can learn. And as each of you dream, you do. And you listen and learn from other dreamers and doers like Lizette and Karina and Yvonne and Tina. And you continue to do every single day. And when you do, and we all do together in community, we can plant and share seeds. We can grow sunflowers, even in gravel, and we can build communities of joy and thriving. Thank you. I'm going to say thank you and good afternoon and evening to everyone on live stream, and I'm going to invite all of you in the room to join me for a walk to see the community mural that Beamer and all of us have been creating. And to ask you to help us, help the wonderful team at Aspen Meadows, because they need to flip this room rather quickly, and I want to help us help them. So.